The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening, the kind that makes you want to stay inside with a hot cup of coffee. But Daniel Cooper didn't have that luxury. He was already running 20 minutes late for his second job, and the clock on his dashboard seemed to be mocking him with every passing minute. Daniel had just finished his shift at Tony's Auto Repair, where he spent 8 hours covered in grease and engine oil. His hands were still stained black around the fingernails no matter how hard he scrubbed. Now he was rushing to get to the downtown office building where he worked as a night janitor. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and that's what mattered when you had a little girl depending on you. His daughter Sophie was 8 years old, with her mother's bright eyes and that same stubborn chin. 3 years ago, Daniel's world had turned upside down when his wife Catherine lost her battle with cancer. The medical bills had piled up faster than he could count them. Even with insurance, there were treatments that weren't covered, experimental drugs that offered hope, specialist visits that cost more than his monthly rent. He'd sold their house, moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment, and taken on the second job just to keep his head above water, but Daniel never complained. Not where Sophie could hear him anyway. She'd already lost so much. The least he could do was make sure she had a roof over her head, food on the table, and maybe even a little something extra for her birthday coming up next month. As he drove through the rain, Daniel's mind wandered to the conversation he'd had with Sophie that morning over breakfast. She'd been unusually quiet, pushing her cereal around in the bowl without eating much. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" he'd asked, sitting down across from her at their small kitchen table. Sophie had looked up at him with those serious eyes that sometimes made her seem older than 8. "Dad, are we poor?" The question had hit him like a punch to the gut. "Why would you ask that?" "Some kids at school were talking. They said I wear the same shoes every day and that my backpack is old." She'd paused, then added quietly, "Are we poor?" Daniel had knelt down beside her chair, taking her small hands in his rough, calloused ones. "Listen to me, Sophie. We might not have a lot of money, but we're rich in the things that matter. We have each other. We have a home. And we have love. That's more than some people ever get." Sophie had nodded, but Daniel could see the doubt in her eyes. Kids were cruel sometimes, even when they didn't mean to be. And the truth was, money did matter in this world, no matter how much he tried to tell himself otherwise. Now, as he drove through the storm, that conversation weighed heavy on his mind. He wanted to give Sophie more. She deserved more. New shoes, a new backpack, maybe even a bike like the other kids had. But every extra dollar went toward paying off those crushing medical bills. That's when he saw the car on the side of the road. It was a Mercedes, sleek and black, with its hazard lights blinking in the rain. A flat tire had left it tilted at an odd angle. Daniel almost drove past. He was already late, and stopping would make him even later. His boss at the janitorial company had already warned him about his tardiness last week. But as his truck moved past the Mercedes, he caught a glimpse of the driver through the rain-streaked window. An older woman, probably in her 70s, sat behind the wheel. She looked confused, maybe even frightened. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly tilted sideways. Daniel's foot hit the brake before his brain could fully process the decision. He couldn't just leave her there. His own mother had passed away when he was young, but he remembered how vulnerable elderly people could be. What if Sophie was stranded somewhere one day and no one stopped to help? He pulled his beat-up truck onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of the Mercedes. The rain soaked through his work jacket the moment he stepped out. He jogged back to the car, his boots splashing through puddles that had formed in the uneven pavement. The woman jumped slightly when Daniel tapped on her window. He tried to look as non-threatening as possible, which wasn't easy when you were a 6-foot-tall guy covered in grease stains, approaching a fancy car in the dark. She lowered the window just a crack. Her eyes were watery and her hands trembled slightly. "Ma'am, I'm not trying to scare you," Daniel said quickly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I just noticed your flat tire. I can help if you'd like. I'm a mechanic." The woman studied his face for a long moment, and Daniel could see her weighing her options. Trust a stranger in the rain or sit here hoping someone else would come along. Finally, she nodded and lowered the window further. "I would be very grateful," she said. Her voice was refined, educated. The kind of voice you heard in old movies. "I'm afraid I don't know anything about changing tires." I called for roadside assistance, but they said it would be at least 2 hours. 2 hours in this weather isn't safe, Daniel said. I can have you back on the road in 15 minutes. Do you have a spare? The woman nodded. I think so. In the trunk? Daniel got to work. The rain had soaked through to his skin now, and he was shivering as he pulled out the jack and spare tire from the trunk. His fingers were stiff from the cold, making the work harder than it should have been. He kept thinking about the time, about his boss's warning, about the few dollars he might lose from his paycheck for being late. But there was something about this woman that reminded him of Catherine's mother, who had helped them so much during the illness. Helping people was just what you did. It's what Catherine would have wanted him to teach Sophie. As he worked, the woman got out of the car, standing under a small umbrella she'd found in the back seat. She watched him work with an intensity that made Daniel slightly uncomfortable. You're getting soaked, she observed. It's just water, Daniel said, grunting as he loosened a particularly stubborn lug nut. I've been wetter. Where were you headed? She asked. I'm making you late for something. Daniel wiped the rain from his face with his sleeve, though it didn't help much. My second job downtown. I work nights as a janitor. Second job? There was something in her voice. Not pity exactly, but interest. Got to keep the lights on somehow, Daniel said with a slight smile, trying to keep the conversation light. He didn't want her feeling bad. I've got a daughter, 8 years old. She's the reason I do everything. The woman was quiet for a moment. What's her name? Sophie. Daniel's face softened when he said it, the way it always did when he thought of his little girl. She's with Mrs. Rodriguez right now, our neighbor. She watches Sophie while I work nights? Your wife? The question hung in the air. Daniel kept working on the tire, his movement steady despite the personal nature of the question. She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. I'm so sorry. The words were simple, but there was genuine feeling behind them. Daniel finished tightening the last lug nut and lowered the car back down. His clothes were completely drenched, and he was pretty sure he'd be sick tomorrow. But the tire was changed and the woman would be safe. There you go, he said, standing up and wiping his hands on his already filthy pants. You're all set. Just make sure you get that tire properly repaired or replaced soon. The spare is just temporary. The woman reached into her expensive leather purse. Please let me pay you for your time and trouble. Daniel held up his hand. No, ma'am. I didn't help you for money. I helped because you needed help. That's enough. She looked at him for a long moment, and Daniel saw something in her eyes he couldn't quite place. It looked almost like tears, but that didn't make sense. At least take my card, she said, pulling out a business card holder from her purse. In case you ever need anything. Daniel took the card more out of politeness than any real intention of using it. In the darkness and rain, he couldn't really read it, but he shoved it into his pocket and gave her a nod. You drive safe now, he said. Roads are slick. Wait, the woman said as he turned to go. What's your name? Daniel. Daniel Cooper. Eleanor, she said, extending her hand. Daniel shook it, his rough oil-stained hand engulfing her delicate manicured one. Thank you, Daniel Cooper. You've done more for me tonight than you know. Daniel didn't understand what she meant by that, but he smiled anyway. Just glad I could help. He jogged back to his truck, his boots squishing with water. As he pulled back onto the road, he could see Eleanor in his rearview mirror, still standing by her car watching him drive away. Daniel glanced at the clock. He was now 40 minutes late. His boss was definitely going to have something to say about this. But as he thought about that older woman, alone and frightened on the side of the road, he knew he'd made the right choice. That's what he'd tell Sophie tomorrow morning. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you something, but it's still worth doing. He just hoped his boss would understand. The rain continued to fall as Daniel drove through the night, heading toward another shift, another few dollars to chip away at the mountain of debt that seemed to grow rather than shrink. He had no way of knowing that stopping for that stranger would change everything. 2 weeks passed, and Daniel had almost forgotten about the woman on the side of the road. Life had a way of swallowing up moments like that, especially when you were working 16-hour days and trying to be a good father in whatever hours remained. Sophie's birthday was getting closer, and Daniel had been saving every spare dollar he could. He'd managed to put aside $43, which wasn't much, but it would be enough for a small cake from the grocery store bakery and maybe a used book from the thrift shop. Sophie loved reading just like her mother had. It was a Thursday afternoon, and Daniel was under the hood of an old Ford pickup at Tony's Auto Repair. His boss, Tony, was a decent guy, rough around the edges but fair. He'd given Daniel a job when he desperately needed one, and for that, Daniel would always be grateful. "Hey, Cooper," Tony called out from the office. "You got mail here." Fancy-looking envelope. Daniel wiped his hands on a rag and walked to the small office at the front of the shop. Sure enough, there was a cream-colored envelope on Tony's cluttered desk. His name was written in elegant handwriting, the kind you don't see much anymore. Everyone just typed these days. "Looks important," Tony said, eyeing the envelope with curiosity. "You in some kind of trouble?" Daniel picked it up, feeling the weight of expensive paper between his fingers. "Not that I know of." He opened it carefully, almost afraid to tear the fancy envelope. Inside was a letter handwritten on matching stationery and a separate card that looked like an invitation. The letter began simply, "Dear Daniel, I hope this letter finds you well." It was from Eleanor, the woman with the flat tire. Daniel felt a strange flutter in his chest as he continued reading. "I cannot stop thinking about your kindness on that rainy night 2 weeks ago. You helped a stranger without hesitation, despite clearly having somewhere important to be. You refused payment and asked for nothing in return. In my long life, I have learned that such genuine kindness is rare and precious. I would very much like to thank you properly. Would you and your daughter Sophie join me for lunch this Saturday at Riverside Restaurant? I understand this may seem unusual, but I hope you will indulge an old woman's desire to express her gratitude. Please see the enclosed reservation details. Everything has been arranged. With warmest regards, Eleanor Whitmore." Daniel read the letter twice, his mind spinning. Riverside Restaurant was one of those places he'd driven past 100 times, but never imagined going inside. It was the kind of restaurant where businessmen took clients and wealthy families celebrated anniversaries. Not the kind of place for a mechanic and his 8-year-old daughter. "What's it say?" Tony asked, unable to contain his curiosity. "Woman I helped couple weeks ago wants to take me and Sophie to lunch," Daniel said slowly. "At Riverside," Tony whistled low. "That's a fancy place. Must have really impressed her." "I just changed her tire," Daniel said, but his mind was already racing ahead to complications. He didn't own a suit. His nicest clothes were a pair of khakis with only one stain, and a button-down shirt he wore to Catherine's funeral. "And Sophie, she only had her church dress and her school clothes. You gonna go?" Tony asked. Daniel looked at the invitation again. Something about it felt off. Not dangerous exactly, but uncomfortable. Like he'd be putting himself somewhere he didn't belong. "I don't know," he admitted. "Seems kind of weird, doesn't it?" Tony shrugged. "Rich people are weird. But free food is free food. And that place probably has stakes bigger than your head. Take the kid, have a nice meal. What's the harm?" What's the harm, Daniel thought. But there was always harm in getting too close to people who lived in a different world. People with money didn't understand what it was like to choose between paying the electric bill and buying groceries. They didn't understand the crushing weight of debt that followed you everywhere, even into your dreams. Still, when Daniel got home that evening and showed Sophie the invitation, her eyes lit up in a way he hadn't seen in months. "A fancy restaurant," she said, practically bouncing on the worn couch. "Really, Dad? Can I wear my church dress?" "If you want to," Daniel said, smiling despite his reservations. "We'd need to go shopping for some new shoes, though. Yours are getting pretty worn." Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "Thank you, Dad. This is almost like an early birthday present." And just like that, Daniel's decision was made. He couldn't say no to that smile. Catherine used to say his soft heart would get him in trouble someday. Maybe she was right. Saturday arrived too quickly. Daniel had managed to find a decent pair of shoes for Sophie at the discount store, and he'd pressed his funeral shirt until it looked almost presentable. He'd even gotten a haircut, spending money he probably shouldn't have. But wanting to look respectable, Mrs. Rodriguez, their neighbor, had helped Sophie with her hair, braiding it in a way that made her look older and more grown up. As they walked to Daniel's truck, Sophie kept reaching up to touch the braids, a nervous habit that told him she was as anxious as he was. "Dad," she said as they drove toward the restaurant, "why did that lady invite us?" "Because she wanted to say thank you," Daniel said. "I helped her when her car broke down." "But why a fancy restaurant?" Sophie pressed. She'd always been perceptive, picking up on things other kids might miss. "Can't she just say thank you regular?" Daniel smiled. "Some people like to do things big, I guess. Let's just enjoy it, okay? How often do we get to eat somewhere nice?" The restaurant was even more intimidating up close. A valet stood at the entrance, and through the tall windows, Daniel could see white tablecloths and crystal glasses catching the afternoon light. He almost turned the truck around. But then he looked at Sophie, her eyes wide with wonder, and he remembered Eleanor's kind face in the rain. She'd invited them. They belonged here just as much as anyone else, even if it didn't feel that way. "Ready?" he asked Sophie. She nodded, gripping his hand tightly as they walked in. The host at the front desk looked them up and down with barely concealed disdain. Daniel felt his face flush. This was a mistake. "They didn't belong here. Can I help you?" the host asked, his tone suggesting they'd wandered into the wrong building. "We're meeting someone," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his discomfort. "Eleanor Whitmore." The host's expression changed instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore is already here. Right this way, please." He led them through the dining room, past tables of well-dressed people having quiet conversations. Daniel was acutely aware of every eye that turned their way, every subtle look of curiosity or judgment. Sophie pressed closer to his side. Then he saw Eleanor rising from a table by the window. She was dressed elegantly in a navy blue dress with pearls, but her smile was warm and genuine. "Daniel," she said, moving forward to greet them. "And this must be Sophie. I'm so glad you both came." Sophie, usually shy around strangers, seemed immediately at ease. "You have pretty pearls," she said. Eleanor laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "Thank you, sweetheart. They were a gift from my late husband. Please, both of you, sit down." The next hour passed in a strange blur. Eleanor ordered food without looking at prices, encouraging them to get whatever they wanted. Sophie's eyes went wide at the menu, where even a simple pasta dish cost more than Daniel usually spent on groceries for a week. "Get whatever looks good," Eleanor said gently, noticing Sophie's hesitation. "This is my treat, and I insist you enjoy yourselves." They ordered, and while they waited for the food, Eleanor asked Sophie about school, her favorite subjects, what she liked to read. Sophie, usually quiet around adults she didn't know, found herself chattering away about her love of stories about animals and her dream of maybe becoming a veterinarian someday. "Your daughter is delightful," Eleanor said to Daniel, and there was something in her eyes that looked like sadness mixed with joy. "She's my whole world," Daniel said simply. "I can see that." Eleanor took a sip of her water. "Daniel, I hope you don't think it's strange that I invited you here. The truth is, what you did for me that night meant more than you could know." "It was just a flat tire," Daniel said, uncomfortable with the attention. "It was more than that." Eleanor set down her glass. "I was on my way to visit my son's grave. It was the 5th anniversary of his death, and I was already emotional. When that tire went flat, I felt so lost, so helpless. And then you stopped." Daniel saw tears forming in Eleanor's eyes, and his heart clenched. "My son Robert was a lot like you," she continued. "He was always helping people, always putting others first. He worked as a mechanic too, actually. He said there was something honest about fixing things, making them work again." "What happened to him?" Sophie asked, her child's directness cutting through the adult awkwardness. "Sophie," Daniel said gently, but Eleanor held up her hand. "It's all right. He died in a car accident 5 years ago. He was on his way to help a friend whose car had broken down. Even at the end, he was helping someone." Eleanor wiped her eyes delicately. "When you stopped to help me, Daniel, in the rain, making yourself late, refusing payment, all I could think was that my Robert would have done exactly the same thing." The food arrived, saving them from the heavy emotion of the moment. But as they ate, the conversation flowed more easily. Eleanor asked about Daniel's work, about Sophie's school, about their life. And slowly, Daniel found himself talking about things he usually kept buried, about Catherine's illness, about the bills that never seemed to end, about working 2 jobs and still barely making it. He wasn't looking for sympathy. He didn't even know why he was sharing all this with a woman he barely knew. But something about Eleanor made him feel safe, like talking to a grandmother he'd never had. Sophie, who had been quietly eating the best chicken pasta she'd ever tasted, suddenly spoke up. "Dad works really hard. He's tired all the time, but he never complains. He's the best dad in the whole world." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Sophie, it's true," she insisted. "You are." Eleanor reached across the table and placed her hand over Daniel's. "You are clearly a wonderful father." Your daughter is lucky to have you, and you should be very proud of the life you're building for her. I just wish I could give her more, Daniel admitted, the words coming out before he could stop them. You're giving her something money can't buy, Eleanor said firmly. You're showing her kindness, integrity, and perseverance. Those are lessons that will serve her far better than any material thing. As lunch wound down and dessert was served, Daniel found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. The restaurant didn't seem so intimidating anymore. The other diners had faded into the background. It was just the three of them, sharing a meal and stories. When the check came, Eleanor paid it without letting Daniel see the total. As they prepared to leave, she pulled out a business card and handed it to Daniel. This has my personal number, she said. I would very much like to stay in touch if you're comfortable with that. And Daniel, there's something I'd like to discuss with you, but not today. Today was just about saying thank you and getting to know you both. Daniel took the card, studying it properly this time. It listed Eleanor as the founder of something called the Whitmore Foundation, along with several other impressive titles he didn't fully understand. You didn't have to do all this, he said. The lunch, everything. I wanted to, Eleanor said simply. She knelt down to Sophie's level. It was lovely meeting you, Sophie. Keep reading those books and dreaming about helping animals. Sophie hugged her, surprising everyone, including herself. Thank you for lunch, Mrs. Whitmore. It was the best meal I ever had. As they drove home, Sophie fell asleep in the passenger seat, exhausted from the excitement. Daniel kept glancing at the business card sitting in his cup holder, wondering what Eleanor wanted to discuss with him. Part of him was curious. Another part was afraid. People like Eleanor Whitmore didn't stay in the lives of people like Daniel Cooper. Their worlds were too different. But as he carried a sleeping Sophie up to their apartment, he couldn't help feeling like something had shifted that afternoon. Like maybe, just maybe, life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 3 days after the lunch, Eleanor called. Daniel was under a car at the shop, replacing an exhaust system, when Tony yelled that he had a phone call. Daniel almost told Tony to take a message, but something made him wipe his hands and walk to the office. Hello? Daniel, it's Eleanor Whitmore. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Her voice was exactly as he remembered it, refined but warm. Daniel glanced at the clock. He had about 10 minutes before he needed to get back under that car. No, ma'am, I've got a few minutes. How are you? I'm well, thank you. I've been thinking about our lunch on Saturday. I so enjoyed meeting Sophie. She's a remarkable young lady. Thank you. She hasn't stopped talking about that meal. I think she's told everyone at school about the chocolate cake. Eleanor laughed. I'm glad. Daniel, I mentioned that I wanted to discuss something with you. Would you be willing to meet with me? Just you this time. Perhaps after your work at the repair shop, but before your evening job. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. What's this about? I'd rather discuss it in person if that's all right. It's nothing bad, I promise. In fact, I hope it might be something quite good. But I don't want to say more over the phone. Against his better judgment, Daniel agreed. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop near downtown the following afternoon. After he hung up, Tony gave him a questioning look. Everything okay? Yes, Daniel said, though he wasn't entirely sure. I think so. The next day dragged by slowly. Daniel couldn't focus on his work properly, his mind spinning with possibilities. What could Eleanor want to discuss? Maybe she wanted to give him money. The thought made him uncomfortable. He'd helped her because it was the right thing to do, not for a reward. By the time he got to the coffee shop, his nerves were shot. Eleanor was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee waiting. She smiled when she saw him, gesturing to the seat across from her. I took the liberty of ordering you a coffee, she said. I hope that's all right. That's fine, thank you. Daniel sat down, his work boots feeling heavy and out of place in the trendy coffee shop. So what did you want to talk about? Eleanor appreciated his directness. She folded her hands on the table, and Daniel noticed they trembled slightly. Was she nervous too? Daniel, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear me out before you respond. Can you do that? He nodded, his throat suddenly dry. My late husband built a considerable fortune in real estate and commercial development. When he passed away 8 years ago, he left me with more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. We had established a foundation to manage charitable giving, but to be honest, I've struggled to find meaningful ways to honor his memory and our son's memory. Daniel listened, not sure where this was going. The Whitmore Foundation supports various causes, but my husband always believed the best investment was in people. Not programs or buildings, but actual individuals who demonstrated character and potential. Eleanor leaned forward. You remind me so much of my son. Not just because you're both mechanics, but because of your values. The way you talk about Sophie, the way you work multiple jobs without complaint, the way you helped a stranger in the rain. These are the qualities my husband would have recognized. Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel started, but she held up her hand. Please, let me finish. My husband's company still exists. It's managed by a board and a CEO, but I remain the primary shareholder. They've been looking for a new director of operations for their fleet management division. This person would oversee the maintenance and management of several hundred vehicles, trucks, and equipment. Daniel's heart was pounding now. He couldn't be suggesting what he thought she was suggesting. The position requires someone with mechanical expertise, someone who understands how things work from the ground up. But more importantly, it requires someone with integrity, someone who treats people fairly and doesn't cut corners. Eleanor pulled out a folder from her bag. I recommended you for the position. What? The word came out louder than Daniel intended. Several other coffee shop patrons looked over. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm just a mechanic. I don't have a college degree. I've never managed anyone. I can't. You can, Eleanor said firmly. And you will if you're willing to try. The salary is $120,000 per year, plus full benefits including health insurance with no deductible. There's also a retirement plan and education benefits that would cover Sophie's college when the time comes. Daniel felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. $120,000. He currently made about $38,000 from both jobs combined. That kind of money would change everything. He could pay off Catherine's medical bills, get Sophie into a better school, maybe even buy a small house. This is crazy, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Because you deserve a chance, Eleanor said simply, and because I believe you'll be excellent at it. But Daniel, I need to be honest with you. This isn't charity. The company needs someone in this role, and I genuinely think you're the right person. However, there will be a 3-month probationary period. If you can't handle the job, if it turns out I was wrong, then we'll part ways professionally. But I don't think I'm wrong. Daniel's mind was racing. This was too much, too fast. Things like this didn't happen to people like him. There had to be a catch. What do I have to do? He asked cautiously. Eleanor slid the folder across to him. Read this. It contains details about the position, the salary, the benefits. Think about it. Discuss it with Sophie if you'd like. Then let me know your decision. But Daniel, I need an answer within a week. The position needs to be filled. Daniel opened the folder with shaking hands. The papers inside looked official, overwhelming. Job descriptions, benefit summaries, organizational charts. It was all real. I need you to understand something, Eleanor continued, her voice gentle. This opportunity has nothing to do with pity. You're not a charity case. You're a hard-working man who's had some bad luck and has been dealt a difficult hand. All I'm offering is a chance to play that hand at a different table. People are going to think I slept my way into this job, Daniel said bluntly. They're going to think there's something weird going on between us. Eleanor smiled sadly. Let them think what they want. You and I know the truth. But yes, there will be people who resent you, who question your qualifications. You'll have to prove yourself every single day. It won't be easy. Nothing worth having ever is, Daniel said, echoing something Catherine used to tell him. He looked down at the papers again, at the numbers that seemed impossible. He thought about Sophie, about the worn shoes and the old backpack, about working himself into an early grave just to stay afloat, about the years of debt still stretching ahead of him. But he also thought about pride, about earning his way, about deserving the things he had. Taking this job felt like cheating somehow, like skipping ahead in line while other people waited their turn. Can I ask you something? Daniel said. Of course. If I wasn't a mechanic, if I didn't remind you of your son, would you still be offering me this? Eleanor considered the question carefully. Honestly, probably not. You're right that there's an emotional component to this decision. But Daniel, that doesn't make it wrong. My son died helping someone. You stopped to help me. There's a poetry to that, a sense of things coming full circle. And if I can honor my son's memory by helping someone like him, someone who embodies the values he lived by, then why shouldn't I? Daniel couldn't argue with that logic. And truthfully, he didn't want to. The opportunity was too good, too life-changing. But fear gnawed at him. Fear of failing, of proving he wasn't smart enough or educated enough or sophisticated enough for a job like this. What if I can't do it? He asked quietly. What if I mess up? Then you'll learn from it and do better, Eleanor said. Daniel, I've spent the last few days making inquiries about you. I spoke to your boss, Tony. He said you're the most reliable employee he's ever had, that customers specifically ask for you because they trust your work. I spoke to Mrs. Rodriguez, your neighbor. She said you're the best father she's ever seen, that Sophie is lucky to have you. These things tell me more about your character than any college degree ever could. Daniel felt his eyes burning. He wasn't used to hearing good things about himself. He was used to barely getting by, to being invisible, to being just another struggling single parent. I need to think about it, he said finally. This is a lot to process. Take your time, Eleanor said. Well, take a week anyway, she smiled. But Daniel, I hope you'll say yes. I think this could be the start of something wonderful for you and Sophie. That evening, after his shift at the janitorial company, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with the folder spread out in front of him. Sophie was asleep, and the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of sirens in the distance. He read every page carefully. The job description made his head spin. Fleet management systems, budget oversight, personnel management, vendor negotiations. These were terms he barely understood. The people he'd be managing probably had college degrees, maybe even advanced degrees. What would they think when some mechanic showed up as their new boss? But then he looked at the salary again. $120,000. With that kind of money, he could give Sophie the life Catherine had wanted for her. Good schools, new clothes, maybe even music lessons or sports or whatever she wanted to try. He picked up his phone and looked at his background photo. It was a picture from Sophie's 6th birthday 2 years ago. Catherine had still been alive then, thin and weak but smiling. The three of them together, a family. Catherine had made him promise that night, in a quiet moment when Sophie was playing with her new toys, that he'd give their daughter the best life he could. Promise me you won't just survive, Catherine had whispered. Promise me you'll really live. Both of you, he'd promised. But in the years since, surviving had been all he could manage. Maybe Eleanor was offering him a chance to do more than survive. Maybe she was offering him a chance to really live. The next morning at breakfast, Sophie noticed the folder on the counter. What's that? She asked through a mouthful of cereal. It's a job offer, Daniel said carefully. A really good job. Better pay, better hours. I'd only have to work 1 job instead of 2. Sophie's eyes went wide. Really? So you wouldn't have to work at night anymore? No, I wouldn't. She set down her spoon. Are you going to take it? I don't know yet. It's complicated. The job is at a big company and I'd be managing a lot of people. I'm not sure I'm qualified. Sophie looked at him with those serious eyes. Mom used to say you could do anything if you tried hard enough. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She did say that, didn't she? So why don't you try? Sophie said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. If you don't like it, you can always go back to being a regular mechanic, right? Out of the mouths of babes, Daniel thought. His 8-year-old daughter had cut right through all his fear and doubt with pure child logic. You're pretty smart, you know that, he said. She grinned. I get it from you. Over the next few days, Daniel did something he rarely did. He asked for advice. He talked to Tony, who told him he'd be crazy not to take it. He talked to Mrs. Rodriguez, who hugged him and said it was about time something good happened to him. He even called Catherine's sister Rachel, who lived 2 states away but still checked in occasionally. Take the job, Daniel, Rachel said firmly. Catherine would want you to. She'd be so proud of you. By the end of the week, Daniel had made his decision. He called Eleanor from the parking lot of the repair shop, his hands sweating despite the cool autumn air. I'll do it, he said when she answered. I'll take the job. But Mrs. Whitmore, I need you to know that I'm going to earn this. I'm not going to coast on your generosity. I'm going to work harder than anyone else in that company. I would expect nothing less, Eleanor said, and Daniel could hear the smile in her voice. Welcome to Whitmore Industries, Daniel. I think this is going to be the beginning of something wonderful. As Daniel hung up the phone, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. It took him a moment to recognize it. The sensation was so foreign. Hope. He felt hope. And maybe, just maybe, things were finally going to get better. Daniel's first day at Whitmore Industries felt like stepping onto a different planet. The building itself was impressive, all glass and steel rising 15 floors into the sky. The lobby had marble floors and modern art that Daniel didn't understand but figured was probably expensive. He'd worn his best clothes, the same outfit from the restaurant, and still felt underdressed compared to everyone walking past in their tailored suits and designer shoes. His hands were sweating as he approached the reception desk. The woman behind it looked up with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Can I help you? I'm Daniel Cooper. It's my first day. I'm the new director of fleet operations." Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or doubt. She typed something into her computer, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the keys. "Oh yes, Mr. Cooper, welcome. Take the elevator to the 8th floor. Someone from HR will meet you there." The elevator ride felt longer than it probably was. Daniel caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked out of place like a kid playing dress-up in his father's clothes. What was he thinking, taking this job? He was a mechanic, not a corporate executive. The elevator doors opened to reveal a woman in her 40s holding a tablet and wearing a smile that seemed more genuine than the receptionist's. "Daniel Cooper?" She extended her hand. "I'm Patricia Chen, head of human resources. Welcome to Whitmore Industries." "Thank you," Daniel said, shaking her hand and hoping his palm wasn't too sweaty. "I'll be handling your orientation today. We have a lot to cover, but I promise we'll take it one step at a time." Patricia started walking, and Daniel followed her down a hallway lined with offices. "Mrs. Whitmore speaks very highly of you." "She's been very kind," Daniel said carefully. Patricia stopped and turned to face him. "I'm going to be honest with you, Daniel." "May I call you Daniel?" "Of course. You're going to face some skepticism." The previous director of fleet operations had an MBA from Stanford and 15 years of experience in logistics. People are going to wonder how a mechanic got this job. Some will assume nepotism. Others will think Mrs. Whitmore has lost her edge. Daniel appreciated her directness. "What do you think?" Patricia smiled. "I think Mrs. Whitmore is one of the smartest people I've ever met. And if she believes in you, that's good enough for me. But you're going to have to prove yourself. Every single day." The orientation took most of the morning. There were forms to fill out, policies to review, passwords to memorize, and systems to learn. Daniel's head was spinning by lunchtime. Patricia took him to the company cafeteria, which was nothing like the break room at Tony's shop. This place had multiple food stations, comfortable seating, and even a view of the city. "Take the afternoon to settle into your office," Patricia said as they parted ways. "Tomorrow you'll meet your team. 8 people total who will be reporting directly to you." Daniel's office was on the 7th floor, and it was bigger than his apartment's living room. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the downtown area. There was a desk made of dark wood, a leather chair, and a computer setup that looked more advanced than anything he'd ever used. He sat down in the chair slowly, half expecting someone to run in and tell him there'd been a mistake, but no one came. This was real. This was his office. His job on the desk was a welcome folder with his name embossed in gold lettering. Inside was his official job description, contact information for his team, and a handwritten note from Eleanor. "Trust yourself, Daniel. You belong here. E.W." That evening, when he picked up Sophie from Mrs. Rodriguez's apartment, she peppered him with questions. "What's your office like? Do you have a big desk? Did you meet nice people? Are you the boss of everyone?" Daniel laughed, her excitement infectious. "The office is great. The desk is huge. And I'm the beau. SS of 8 people, which is terrifying." "You'll be a good boss," Sophie said confidently. "You're nice and you know about cars." If only it were that simple, Daniel thought. The next day he met his team. They gathered in a conference room, 8 faces looking at him with varying degrees of curiosity, skepticism, and in one case, clear hostility. Daniel had prepared a speech, but looking at these people with their college degrees and years of experience, the words he'd practiced felt hollow, so he decided to just be honest. "I know you're all wondering who I am and why I'm here," he started. "My name is Daniel Cooper. Until 2 weeks ago, I was a mechanic at an auto repair shop. I don't have an MBA. I don't have a college degree at all. What I do have is 15 years of hands-on experience with vehicles, a willingness to work hard, and a lot to learn from all of you." He saw a few surprised expressions. At least they had expected corporate speak and fancy jargon. "I'm not here to pretend I know more than you do about systems and logistics and all the technical parts of your jobs. You're the experts in those areas. But I know vehicles. I know what makes them run, what makes them fail, and how to fix them. I'm hoping we can combine your expertise with mine to make this department the best it can be." A man in his 30s with styled hair and an expensive suit spoke up. His nameplate said Trevor Kingston, Senior Fleet Analyst. "With all due respect, Mr. Cooper, this position requires strategic thinking and vendor management skills. How do you plan to handle negotiations with suppliers when you've never worked in procurement?" It was a fair question, but the tone made it clear that Trevor thought Daniel was out of his depth. "You're right, I haven't," Daniel said evenly. "That's why I'll be relying heavily on people like you who have. But I'd argue that knowing the actual value and quality of parts gives me an advantage in negotiations. I've spent years identifying overpriced parts and finding reliable alternatives. That experience has to count for something." A woman in her 50s, Linda Martinez, logistics coordinator according to her nameplate, spoke next. Her voice was kinder than Trevor's. "What's your first priority in this role?" "Learning," Daniel said immediately. "I need to understand how this department functions, what challenges you're facing, and what resources you need. I'd like to meet with each of you individually this week to hear your perspectives." The meeting lasted another hour. Some team members seemed cautiously optimistic. Others, like Trevor, remained openly skeptical. But at least they were talking, and Daniel figured that was a start. The first few weeks were brutal. Daniel arrived early and stayed late, trying to understand systems and processes that felt completely foreign. He spent his evenings reading management books from the library and watching YouTube videos about fleet management software. Sophie noticed his stress. One night she found him at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, his head in his hands. "Dad, are you okay?" He looked up, forcing a smile. "Yes, sweetheart. Just work stuff. It's a lot to learn." She climbed into the chair next to him. "Is it too hard? Do you want to go back to being a regular mechanic?" The question hit him harder than she probably intended. Did he want to quit? Some days, honestly, yes. It would be easier to go back to Tony's shop, back to a job he knew he could do well. "I don't know," he admitted. "What do you think I should do?" Sophie thought about it seriously. "I think Mom would say you should keep trying. She always said you never know what you can do until you try really hard." Daniel pulled her into a hug. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm 8 now," she said matter-of-factly. "Almost 8.5, he laughed despite his stress. "You're right. I should keep trying," and he did. Slowly, things started to click. The first breakthrough came when he joined the mechanics in the field, something his predecessor apparently never did. He spent a day riding along with the maintenance teams, getting his hands dirty, understanding their challenges firsthand. "You're different from the last guy," one of the senior mechanics told him. His name was Pete, and he'd been with the company for 20 years. He never left his office. Didn't want to get his fancy suit dirty. "I'm more comfortable under a hood than behind a desk," Daniel admitted. "We can tell," Pete said, and it was clearly a compliment. "The guys are already talking about it. Word travels fast." That fieldwork gave Daniel insights that translated into real improvements. He identified inefficiencies in the maintenance schedule, found ways to reduce downtime, and even discovered that some vendors were overcharging for standard parts. In his second month, he presented his findings to the senior management team. His hands shook as he stood before the executives, but he'd done his homework. He had numbers, data, and concrete suggestions. Trevor had been skeptical of his presentation, clearly expecting Daniel to embarrass himself. But as Daniel walked through his analysis, showing how practical mechanical knowledge combined with better scheduling could save the company $500,000 annually, he saw expressions change. The CEO, a stern woman named Victoria Brennan, who rarely smiled, leaned forward. "Mr. Cooper, this is impressive work. How quickly can you implement these changes?" "I'd need buy-in from the team," Daniel said. "But if everyone's on board, we could start rolling it out next month." "Make it happen," she said. After the meeting, even Trevor approached him, though he looked like it pained him to do so. "That was solid work," Trevor admitted. "I didn't think—" "Well, I underestimated you." "Thanks," Daniel said. "And Trevor? I wasn't kidding when I said I need your expertise. You're good at the analytical stuff that doesn't come naturally to me. I'd like to work together more closely." Trevor seemed surprised by the olive branch, but he nodded. "I'd like that." Not everyone came around as quickly. There were still whispers, still sideways glances, still questions about how he'd really gotten the job. Daniel heard the rumors, that he was related to Eleanor, that they were having an affair, that he had dirt on someone. It hurt, but Daniel tried not to let it show. He focused on his work, on proving his worth through results rather than words. Eleanor checked in regularly, usually over coffee or lunch. She never asked about specifics of his work, respecting the boundary between her role as his champion and his need to prove himself independently. "How are you holding up?" she asked during one of their lunches. "Some days better than others," Daniel admitted. "People are starting to see that I can do the job, but there's still a lot of doubt." "Give it time," Eleanor said. "You're doing exactly what you need to do. Trust the process." The real test came in month 3, right before his probationary period ended. A major client's entire fleet broke down due to a defective batch of transmission fluid from one of their suppliers. It was a crisis that could cost the company millions in penalties and damage their reputation. Daniel got the call at 2 in the morning. By 3, he was in the office, pulling together his team. By dawn, he'd organized a response plan. Emergency mechanics deployed to every location, arrangements made with alternative suppliers for replacement fluid, and a communication strategy to keep the client informed. He worked for 48 hours straight, catching only brief naps on his office couch. He coordinated teams, negotiated with suppliers, and personally oversaw the most critical repairs. His hands-on experience meant he could troubleshoot problems in real time, something that saved crucial hours. When the crisis was finally resolved, the client sent a personal thank you email to Victoria Brennan, specifically mentioning Daniel's handling of the situation. Victoria called him into her office. Daniel went, exhausted and still wearing the same wrinkled shirt from 2 days ago. "Sit down." "Mr. Cooper," she said. Daniel sat, wondering if somehow he'd still managed to mess something up. "That was exceptional work," Victoria said. "You handled a major crisis with competence and grace. The client is happy, we minimized financial damage, and your team speaks highly of your leadership during the emergency." "Thank you," Daniel said, relief flooding through him. "I just did what needed to be done. That's precisely the attitude this company needs." Victoria pulled out a folder. "Your probationary period ends this Friday. I'm pleased to inform you that you've not only met expectations, you've exceeded them. Welcome to Whitmore Industries permanently, Mr. Cooper." Daniel felt tears prick his eyes, but he blinked them back. "Thank you. This opportunity has meant everything to me." "You've earned it," Victoria said firmly. "Now go home and get some sleep." "You look terrible," Daniel laughed. "Yes, ma'am." That evening, he picked up Sophie from school himself for the first time in months. She ran to him, her backpack bouncing. "Dad, you're here. Usually Mrs. Rodriguez gets me." "I know. I wanted to surprise you." He knelt down to her level. "I have some news. Good news or bad news?" "Good news. Really good news. I officially passed my trial period at work. The job is permanent." Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "I knew you could do it." "I told you." As they walked to the car, hand in hand, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. He'd done it. Against all odds, despite all doubts, he'd proven he belonged. And more importantly, he'd proven it to himself. He thought about calling Eleanor to thank her, but decided it could wait until morning. Tonight was for him and Sophie. Tonight was for celebrating how far they'd come.